In this documentary, I intend to highlight the main arguments presented in Martin Anderson's book, The Federal Bulldozer, and then show how the arguments made in this book, when juxtaposed on the real-life example of urban renewal in Avondale, show how the federal urban renewal programs in the 1950s and the 1960s were for the most part doomed to failure because of their very nature. Anderson argues that the federal urban renewal program, while striving for admirable goals, fell far short and necessitates the repeal of the program. He boldly states in the opening chapters that anyone who supports federal urban renewal must also support forcible displacement of millions of citizens, seizure of private property, and the expenditure of billions of taxpayer dollars. One of the most prescient points that Anderson highlights is the strange paradox that he perceives in the process of the urban renewal program. This paradox is essentially that specific parts of the urban renewal program are growing at an exceedingly fast pace, while other specific parts are moving painstakingly slow. This dichotomous development can be, according to Anderson, divided into the dual stages of preparatory and results. The majority of the social and economic costs result in the preparatory phase, while most of the new construction begins in the results stage. Anderson finds that the substantial growth in the decades since the inception of urban renewal has been in the preparatory phase, while the results phase has seen significant stagnation. What this essentially equates to is that substantial progress has been made with respect to the number of persons forced from their homes, the number of businesses forcibly replaced, while relatively insignificant numbers of projects have actually been completed and new construction has been proceeding at a generally slow pace. As was stated previously, one of Anderson's main theoretical concerns was with the seemingly large gap between the perception of the federal urban renewal program and the reality of the program itself. One such perception that he debunks is that the federal urban renewal program has contributed greatly to the solving of housing problems for middle and low-income groups. Anderson contends that this is precisely the opposite, and that the large-scale clearance of low-rent housing has in fact made it harder for residents within these demographics to find affordable housing. Another perception that Anderson questions is that families required to move end up in better housing. He again debunks this and states that many of the displaced often end up in worse housing conditions than before, and to add insult to injury, often pay much higher rents. A third perception is that the federal urban renewal program does not affect any racial group disproportionately. Anderson uses housing data to show that 60% of people who are displaced by these programs are African American or other minority groups. One of the more significant notions that Anderson dispels is that urban renewal eliminates slums and stops the progress of blight. Indeed, this is one of the main driving goals behind the federal urban renewal program initiative in the first place. However, Anderson contends that urban renewal does not eliminate slums, but rather moves them to another location, effectively encouraging the spread of blight rather than its destruction. Having covered the major relevant points outlined in the Federal Bulldozer, it is now necessary to conduct a quick survey of the history of Avondale itself and the conditions which compounded to necessitate urban renewal in the first place. Founded in 1840, Avondale began as a small enclave for wealthy Cincinnati businessmen, most of who resided in single-family homes which served as housing in the city far past their intended date. Avondale experienced large growth and vitalization in the form of a Jewish diaspora, which lasted until the post-World War II period. At this time, many of these original families moved out of the neighborhood due to high maintenance costs of the decaying single-family homes. The reputation of the area still succeeded in attracting new waves of African American families who were willing to move into homes which were already in need of heavy maintenance. This practice led to a large segment of African Americans living in properties of which they had no money to pay for maintenance or the exorbitantly high monthly rent. Subsequently, this same large segment began to rent out rooms and conduct illegal modifications in order to make payments, resulting in a sharp depreciation of properties throughout Avondale. The situation reached a tipping point in 1961 when only 8% of dwelling units in Avondale were single-family buildings and 53% of dwelling units were buildings with 2 to 4 dwelling units, most of which were originally single-family homes. The Avondale area had first been designated for rehabilitation and renewal by the master plan in 1948, but the planning did not begin until 1957. The area was considered a prime experiment neighborhood for Cincinnati's first rehabilitation program, because it had excellent access and possessed numerous citywide vital institutions such as University of Cincinnati and the Zoological Gardens. The three overarching objectives of this renewal plan were: 1. To develop the assets in the area, 2. To restore confidence in the people that the area had a viable future, and 3. To invite the attention of investors to the opportunities for new investment in addition to the maintenance of the old. To this end, the Commission came up with a tripartite plan to carry out these renewal objectives. With the conclusion of the planning phase, however, Avondale was already beginning to experience problems. A lack of federal funding had delayed implementation for 2 years, and in the interim the number of owner-occupied dwellings decreased. The uncertainty due to delays, coupled with the increasing flight of owners and inexperience on the part of the city in conducting such renewal efforts, resulted in the first several years of implementation being very slow and behind ideal goals. The city attempted to reinvigorate the renewal plan by agreeing to deals to bulldoze numerous properties in order to expand the facilities of the hospital complex, the UC campus, and the Taft Environmental Health Center. While these large institution-scale projects advanced, Avondale was rocked by an event that would leave its character permanently altered. The 1967 civil rights riots not only left $3 million in physical damage and 63 deaths, but more importantly, it was the last straw for the few remaining middle-class residents and owners who subsequently left for more prosperous areas. In 1972, a follow-up survey was done in Avondale to assess the results of the renewal plan and the satisfaction of the residents. The overwhelming opinion was that the plan was a failure. In fact, the only parties that appear to be happy with the results are the large institutions such as the Taft Center and the University of Cincinnati. The negative reactions of the community to the renewal project stem from several factors. One factor was that the project stated unattainable goals. Its low amount of grants in relation to the extensive repairs required negated any meaningful modernization. Another factor was that during the implementation itself, the economic and social status of the community decreased, therefore making most projections void. In addition, the destruction of 1,500 buildings, which equaled 2,970 dwelling units, was 100 more than stated in the original renewal plan, and which was almost solely used by the larger institutions rather than the residents themselves. Another final factor was the disconnect between the city and neighborhood goals, which resulted in the city demolishing some of the best housing to make way for hospital parking lots. Present-day Avondale is virtually devoid of any retail stores, and the closest supermarkets, banks, or shops are 1.5 miles away. It has a 95% African American population, and multi-family dwellings continue to be the overwhelming norm. In addition, the lack of any retail stores in the neighborhood itself has forced the inhabitants of Avondale to spend the nearly $84 million in yearly incomes after taxes they possess in neighborhoods outside of their own, in effect causing all their income to flow out of their own community.